Okay, now let's go on with this second part, which is structuralism. So after listening about de Saussure's ideas, yes, at the heart of Saussure's ideas is the focus of linguistics on the structure of the language system, which is shared by members of a certain speech community. Okay, structure of the language system. So this is why the Saussurean type of linguistic is also referred to as structural linguistics or structuralist linguistics, because the center of the study is the language system, or lang, are not the concrete language used by the individual or parole. Yes? So remember behaviorism. So remember that we studied the nature of language. Okay, they were not concerned with the production stage, okay, but with repeating a set of patterns of language, which were studied by structuralism. So structural linguistic aims at the description, yes, and analysis of all the elements of the language system and the relationships that exist between them. Remember that de Saussure says that the system is interlinked. We cannot study items in isolation. So all the description analysis of all the elements in the language system and the relationships that exist between them, which are investigated at all structural levels of linguistics. For example, the sounds, the words, or sentence level. But here, this is something very important that I'm learning, that the term structural linguistics is sometimes misunderstood as it is not a separate branch or a school of linguistics. Because all linguistics, since de Saussure, is structural. As a structure in this broad sense merely means the recognition that language is a pattern system composed of interdependent elements rather than a collection of unconnected individual items. The thing is that sometimes structuralism is like concerned with American structuralism that developed linguistics as a science, right? And then we have a functionalism that deals with the function of language, but always the idea is that language is a set of structures, okay? Then we have the Prague School, which is, we are still in Europe. The Prague School is a tradition of linguistic thought that is associated with the Czech and other linguistic circle of Prague in 1926. And this group held regular meetings and published a journal. But the primary interest of the cycle was the phonological theory. And they have very interesting insights, but into phonetics and phonology. Yeah, so the Prague School phonology succeeded in placing the notion of the phoneme in the center of linguistic theory as one of the most fundamental units. For them, the phoneme was most important, even the words. First of all, you need the sounds. They also made contributions to the field of syntax. This is more or less to know what happened, let's see, in different schools and different, maybe at the same time, but at different places in the world. Phonetics and phonology were dominant in early modern linguistics. So there was an International Phonetic Association, yes. The British phonetician Henry Sweet was one of the leading figures in phonetics in the second half of the 19th century, and Sweet and the Polish linguist Courtney were independently instrumental in the development of the notion of the phoneme or distinctive sounds. This is just to have an idea, okay? The fact is that most linguists or scholars were very much interested in sounds or morphemes, but not in syntax. Until Chomsky, it was such difficult and complex, I think, that it was not investigated or researched or studied until Chomsky. Okay, now, around the beginning of the 20th century, now we're going to move to America. Okay, linguistics began as an offshoot of anthropology. Why? We think what is the similarity? What has to do anthropology with linguistics? Because the thing is that there were many fast-dying American Indian tribes. They were disappearing. And so American Indian languages were disappearing also. So there were many anthropologists who were eager to record the culture and the language. So there were no firm guidelines for linguists to follow. Yes, when they attempted to describe exotic languages, there was no set of procedures to say, well, this is an Aboriginal language, and they want to study and record it. But how? How can they record it? What is the process? What is the methodology for doing this? They didn't have any. So we have some structural linguistics in America, which were Franz Boas, Edward Sapir, and Leonard Bloomfield. Franz Boas, I think it's okay, who was a German-American anthropologist, and he's considered the founder of American linguistics and American anthropology, very famous in America. And his major concern was to obtain information as Native American languages and cultures were disappearing. So he wanted to have some information about them before they disappear. So he had a good investigation of those cultures, but for having a good investigation, he required the knowledge of their language. He needed to know their languages. So he attacked the common prejudice that race, culture, and language are part and not and parcel, and so that they are different among each other, that we have to differentiate what is language, what is race, and what is culture. No, they are all together. And he studied the Athabascan linguistic families. So he said that people who speak languages of the Athabascan stock live in Northwest America, in small tribes in California, and in large numbers in Arizona and New Mexico. And these Athabascan speakers differ fundamentally in physical, racial types, and their cultures are also distinct. So according to the place they live, okay, they have many differences. And so that's why he said that it is interconnected. We cannot separate, let's say, culture, language, and race. And Edward Sapir, who was a student, was highly admired during his life, and is still kind of hero to many linguists, because he published extensively in both linguistics and anthropology. And he did first-hand field work in many American Indian languages. It's like he went on working, yes, with his tutors' work or teachers' work, and he contributed to historical linguistics and wrote many theoretical works. And Sapir came to linguistics with a strong background in music, art, more or less to know about him, and he was deeply interested in uncovering possible relations between language and culture. So you see that here, you come to see that from studying language itself as an isolated system, these scientists started bringing the idea of a context, that language is developed within a context. This is very important. This concept is absolutely important. Yes, and he uncovered these relations between language and culture. Okay? Bien. So and then there is another student who was Benjamin Lee Worf. He pursued his teacher's interest and produced a number of studies of Native American and Canadian languages. And he developed this Sapir-Whorf hypothesis that the structure of our language must, to some extent, determine the way we perceive the world. Have a look at this. This was a very, very challenging statement, that the structure of our language determines the way we perceive the world. And when I was studying Especialización en Didáctica, there were many differences. For example, in English, they compared how many verbs they have, as a difference with Spanish, which is more descriptive than English. And it changes the way. I will try to look for that example. There was an example there, I don't have it now, I couldn't find it now, but it's very interesting. The amount of verbs English language has and compared with Spanish. And his theory holds that a speaker's perception of the world is organized or constrained by the linguistic categories his or her language offers. And that language structure determines thought. You can have a look how language, it determines thought and how one experiences and how one views the world. Okay? Very interesting. I think it's very interesting theory. And then we have Bloomfield and American Structuralism, and here comes maybe the confusion between the Saussures and the trend, let's say, the school of thought, which is structuralism. This state of affairs changed with the publication in 1933 his work called Language. Yes, and he's the father, like the father of linguistics as a science, because he laid down the rigorous procedures for the description of any language. So remember that I said that the anthropologists trying to discover or record or research the native language as well. What Bloomfield did was to lay down procedures, very rigorous procedures for the description of any language. And in that moment, linguistics became a science, a discipline. So he tried to establish linguistics truly as a science of language. Before that was just an attempt. There were many attempts to describe language, but now he wanted to make it a science of language. And so his main concern was to delimit the role of linguistics in relation to the other sciences, and to develop the principles and concepts of linguistics into a well-balanced and unified structure. Okay, some principles that can guide the linguist to describe. So he restricted the object of linguistic inquiry to the formal characteristics of linguistic utterances. So the object of linguistic, yes, that the object of linguistic was the linguistic utterances. In the division of a scientific labor, the linguist deals only with the speech signal. Well, so this is quite a lot, but the idea is, what is important here to know is that he made linguistics into a science, and the data for the linguistic science, what did they study? A set of verbal utterances which constitutes a corpus. So what was the task of a linguist? To study the corpus of utterances and to discover regularities and structures. For example, that is to say, the language in the specimen of parole, what they produce, what utterances produce. His thesis helped linguistics to establish itself as an autonomous field, and Bloomfield wanted linguistics to become an empirical and descriptive science. It was not prescriptive. The principal value of language lies in the closely argued and balanced presentation of the essential concepts, which enable the linguist to analyze a language from sound to sentence. Yeah, you see, from the very sound to the sentence. And it is balanced in that it gives approximately equal weight to the different levels of analysis. Phonology, morphology, and syntax. To all levels, they get the equal weight. It's not phonology more important than this. So they omitted the semantic component. So, firstly, the consequences. Bloomfield had immense influence on the so-called Bloomfieldian era. It lasted for more than 20 years. And linguistics in the Bloomfieldian tradition continue to operate with the concepts developed by Bloomfield to refine them and to use them for more vigorous descriptions of language. So, people who went on with his work. So the outcome was, in the 40s and 50s, many well-ordered, objective, detailed, and informative presentations of linguistics of a particular aspect of language. Okay, so that was the main importance of Bloomfield. And this is what you have to know. Then Chomsky came and destroyed. No, he didn't destroy, but he opposed and he discussed many of the ideas of Bloomfield that he was not able to explain or to justify through this model or procedures he devised. Okay, so this is the first part. Let's go on with functionalism.